and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. How would you feel if I told you that the economic ideology that dominates our lives has, for most of us, no name? Most of us know the term but can't define it. It has played a role in the 2008 financial crisis, the explosion of inequality, the collapse of our public and health education systems, our climate crisis, and helped fuel the rise of a certain hint of orange former president. It's called neoliberalism, and its relative anonymity is its most important strength. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get started. Neoliberalism is so omnipresent and omnipotent in our lives that one would think it has always been here. But in reality, it arose as an attempt to reshape human life and shift the center of power. It manages to redefine citizens simply as consumers who can best exercise their voice by buying and selling. This rewards merit and punishes inefficiency. This is all under the belief that the market delivers benefits that can never be achieved by planning. Neoliberals have led the charge to eliminate tax and regulation, privatize public services, and demonize organized labor. They have successfully been able to rebrand inequality as a good thing that only negatively affects those who are inefficient. The market rewards those who are productive, and everyone else gets what they deserve. The rich have been able to convince themselves that they deserve their immense wealth without recognizing the advantages that they have in education, inheritance, and class. This causes those less fortunate to blame ourselves if we aren't quote, quote, good enough to make it rich. Before we jump into a historical look at the development of neoliberalism, it is important to look at it through the lens of MMT. In this next clip, we see Steve Grumbine discuss with the president of the Modern Money Network, Rohan Grey, about what exactly neoliberalism is and how it leads to people to becoming more tolerant of the horrible things that we claim to despise in the first place. It causes people to be resigned to the fact that things can't change and just become complacent with inequality and struggle. Grey, on the other hand, explains how MMT has pierced the wall that let us see that we can demand more and have nice things. Once we get past this idea of finite growth, then we can see that the biggest economic inefficiency in human history is the waste of our own human brains.
We try to expose how to defeat neoliberalism through an understanding of MMT. They come back and they say that's magic money. Can you please explain what neoliberalism is and how MMT can state that? I mean, give your historical lessons as well, for sure, in this, if you don't mind.
So every man and his dog has a definition of neoliberalism. The line that I find that sort of characterizes neoliberalism to me is that line from The Usual Suspects, which is the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. It is an ideology that is unique in the sense that it denies it is an ideology. It's sort of trying to say that we've had left-handers and right-handers fighting forever about which hand is best, and the answer is it's feet. It says, well, okay, maybe there's fascists, and maybe there's people who believe in free healthcare and childcare and free education. Let's call them socialists. And look, they're both basically the same. One's extreme left and one's extreme right. You know, one wants children who identify with a different gender than that they were assigned at birth to have the right to go to whatever bathroom they want. And the other one wants to burn crosses on black people's lawns. It's the same. It's the same thing. And they kind of have this resigned cynicism towards believing in it, towards believing that anything can be different than what we have today. So the challenge becomes trying to get people to believe that there can be big things different tomorrow than there were today. The problem with MMT is MMT pierces the veil that neoliberalism has put on political discourse. So what neoliberalism has said is you can have any policy you want as long as every time you take a little bit, you have to give a little bit. That conversation is premised on the idea that we have a scarce amount of stuff. It's a fixed pie mentality. which is why the idea of a government that needs to ultimately pay back all of its debt is so valuable to that story. The idea that government borrowing is taking stuff away from other people is fundamental to the neoliberal worldview that nothing is growing. That is the thing that the MMT analysis debunks, because it explains that when you issue new treasury debt, you are issuing new net financial assets. Then the question is there going to be inflation? And the answer is probably not. If you increase the spending in the economy, just add more money from the government for goods or services, as long as there is spare capacity to produce those goods and services, there's no reason to expect inflation to occur. The biggest so-called free lunch, or the biggest waste, is all of the people we are keeping unemployed by our deliberate decisions. So one of my law professors used to say, and I like this line, the biggest economic inefficiency in human history is the wastage of human brains.
But where did the term neoliberalism come from? While Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises are credited with coining the term in the late 1930s, the ideology of neoliberal economics began to take root in the US and abroad in the 1970s and 80s as Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher took power. In this next clip, we see Noam Chomsky explain how neoliberal policies have transformed the definition of freedom to mean the erosion of the mechanisms that ensure a just and equitable society, and rather channel wealth upward by placing decision-making capabilities into the hands of the nation's wealthy elite.
So there's the two existential threats that we've created. In the case of nuclear war, maybe wipe us out. Case of environmental catastrophe, severe impact. And then a third thing happened. Beginning around the 70s, human intelligence dedicated itself to eliminating, or at least weakening, the main barrier against the threats. It's called neoliberalism. If you ask yourself there was a transition at that period from the period of what some people call regimented capitalism, 50s and 60s, the great growth period, egalitarian growth, a lot of advances in social justice and so on. That changed in the 70s, and with the onset of the neoliberal era that we've been living in since.
We deregulated the airlines. We deregulated the trucking industry. We deregulated financial institutions. We decontrolled oil and natural gas prices. And we negotiated lower trade barriers throughout the world to get rid of needless and burdensome federal regulations, which benefit nobody and which harm all of us.
And if you ask yourself what this era is, its crucial principle is undermining mechanisms of social solidarity and mutual support and popular engagement in determining policy. It's not called that. What's called is freedom.
And I'm not in favor of fairness. I'm in favor of freedom. And freedom is not fairness. Fairness means somebody has to decide what's fair.
But freedom means subordination to the decisions of concentrated, unaccountable private power. That's what it means. The institutions of governance or other kinds of association that could allow people to participate in decision-making, those are systematically weakened. Margaret Thatcher said it rather nicely in her aphorism about there is no society, only individuals. She was actually unconsciously, no doubt, paraphrasing Marx, who in his condemnation of the repression in France said the repression is turning society into a sack of potatoes. Just individuals, amorphous mass, can't act together. That was a condemnation. For Thatcher, it's an ideal. And that's neoliberalism. We destroy, or at least undermine, the governing mechanisms in which people, at least in principle, can participate to the extent the society is democratic. So weaken them, undermine unions, other forms of association, leave a sack of potatoes, and meanwhile transfer decisions to unaccountable private power, all in the rhetoric of freedom. Well, what does that do? The one barrier to the threat of destruction is an engaged public, an informed, engaged public acting together to develop means to confront the threat and respond to it. And that's systematically weakened for people to become more passive and apathetic and not to disturb things too much. And that's what the neoliberal programs do. So put it all together, and what do you have? A perfect storm. This is all very simple. It's all in front of our eyes. All you have to do is look. It takes no profound intelligence, takes no special insight. Just look at what's in front of your eyes. It's right there. And in fact, I think a lot of people see it.
As you can see, the neoliberal vision of society states that we exist to serve the economy at the expense of the planet. But as Dr. Bill Mitchell eloquently stated, if we view society through the lens of MMT, we see that the economy is us and we create it to serve us and the planet. It's not enough to oppose this decrepit system. We must educate ourselves and others for a coherent alternative, and that way is by learning MMT. Once we learn how our macroeconomic system works, then we can harness the true power of being a fiat currency issuer and shift the power dynamic to have our economy work for all of us rather than just for a few. That is how we can have a system that meets the demands of the 21st century. If you like this episode, make sure to check out our streams on Rockfin, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch. Thank y'all and have a great week.